So excited to be here and welcome. We're just so glad that co-working is a topic today. And now I know some of you are sitting in this room thinking, what in the world is co-working? And for that, we made a little video that we premiered at the Global Co-working Conference this spring, and we're going to play it for you now.
The number of co-working spaces around the world has increased by 400% in the past 2 years. These innovative spaces are cropping up everywhere. Co-working is redefining the way we work. Co-working spaces offer more than just shared offices and good coffee. These collaborative communities provide something special: connectedness. With the cultural shift to mobility, more people are parting ways with their traditional work environment. Let's see why people are ditching their cubes, giving up their home offices, and moving from their local coffee shops. In the corporate setting, the average cube shrank from 500 square feet to 200 square feet. To reduce cost and enhance productivity, corporations are adopting alternative work strategies. This freedom allows their employees to work, well, anywhere. Home offices offer an integration of work and life. Over 20 million Americans work from home, including 90% of freelancers. Yet the lack of social interaction can lead to loneliness and slower business growth. And there are distractions. Distractions and distractions. Many workers seek public spaces for relief. Coffee shops can be found on every corner. This trendy workspace offers free Wi-Fi and good coffee. But the fact is, coffee shops are not designed for work. The noise and lack of privacy are major complaints. As a result, only 2% of freelancers still rely on them to conduct their business. So where can workers go? Co-working spaces help workers find accelerated serendipity. Freelancers can bounce ideas off small business owners. Entrepreneurs can inspire corporate refugees, and fledgling startups can quickly build a diverse social network. All here in one interactive space. Now go find a co-working space in your town and experience accelerated serendipity for yourself.
All right, so hopefully we're now on a level playing field. I wanted each of my panelists to give us a little 2-minute introduction so we can learn a little bit more about you. And we'll start with you, Alex.
Sure. So my name is Alex Hillman. I'm the co-founder of Indy Hall, which is short for Independence Hall. It's a co-working space in Philadelphia, right around the corner from the other one. Sort of like the video just showed, it was not so much a response to needing a place to work, but needing people. And I was that freelancer who was sitting at home in my robe. And while my girlfriend at the time would tell you that I did need to get out of the house, it was really my own motivation to be around other people in order to grow my business. And so I went out seeking other people in Philadelphia so that I wouldn't have to leave Philadelphia to go to another city where it was perceived to be easier to find people like me. 5 years later, that ragtag group of 15 or 20 of us has grown to well over 250 people. We expanded what is now our third iteration. We've only had one location at a time, but we were in our third iteration. We're now over 10,000 square feet in a sort of prime part of Philadelphia. And we expanded in June. Since then, have been growing faster than we ever have. So we've clearly struck a nerve along the way. In addition to helping support the entrepreneurial community in Philadelphia and inspire it to grow, I've gotten to spend time with the co-working community around the world, the people that are doing stuff like what we do, and traveling around the world and helping other co-working spaces in other cities solve the same kind of problems that we have at home.
Awesome, thanks. Tony?
Hi everybody, I'm Tony Bacigalupo. I'm the co-founder and mayor of a co-working space in New York called New Work City. I'm the stand-in panelist. Campbell couldn't make it today, so you'll see my bio in the insert. But I've been involved in co-working, championing it in New York and around the world for the last 5 years or so, alongside Alex. who I'm now actually working with on an online masterclass teaching people how to build better communities, which has been super exciting to work with Alex on. Finally, lately, so I generally maintain a pretty sunny disposition, but lately I've been getting kind of pissed because I have a lot of people that I care about who are struggling to find work, who are struggling with the work that they're doing. A lot of people graduating college without jobs, my sister included, to await them. More than half of all college graduates actually not finding work. And so I'm getting frustrated because it's not getting fixed, this job crisis, and I think somebody needs to step up and fix this stupid thing. And I think that starts by not thinking of work as a job that gets handed to you, but something that you choose to do on your own terms. And that's a different kind of a mindset that a lot of people are used to. But I think that that's how we're going to get out of this mess, and I think that that's something that we can do here. I think the people in this room are the folks who are going to be the ones to do it. So I'm really excited to be here and talk to all of you about it.
Thank you, Tony. Dario?
Hi, my name is Dario Mutabdzija. I'm a co-founder and president of Blueseed. Blueseed is a company based in Silicon Valley, and the problem that we are trying to solve is the problem foreign high-tech entrepreneurs have when trying to come to places like Silicon Valley. Namely, basically, it's impossible, practically impossible for them to legally come and work there because there is no visa that would enable them to do so. In my opinion, that's a huge travesty and loss to US and the world economy. So the proposed solution that we have, we call it entrepreneurial solution to fundamentally legislative problem, is to position a ship 12 miles away from California coastline, from Silicon Valley, and on that ship we would house basically between 200 and 300 early stage startups, approximately 1,000 to 1,200 entrepreneurs from different parts of the world, and connect them to Silicon Valley, awesome Silicon Valley ecosystem with investors, potential employees, potential partners, and help them achieve their dreams, do everything they can so they can scale their companies. So Blueseed is kind of an interesting intersection of different themes that were mentioned today. You have a Startup Visa Act that Steve Case talked about. Blueseed is an entrepreneurial attempt to solve some of those issues. You have a co-working spaces, and of course our goal is to be one of the coolest co-working spaces ever, being on a ship and creating an environment where you can have 1,000 best and brightest individuals living and working close proximity to each other. I think will produce amazing results. And of course, creation of jobs and helping the economy as a whole. We all know that the job creators are startup entrepreneurs. I mean, that was mentioned this morning as well. So for Blueseed, I think, has a very interesting, and I would say to a certain extent, noble mission, where we will do everything we can to advance this agenda in the way we can. So I'm excited to be part of that.
Thanks, Dario. So we've talked about co-working, we've met our panelists. Why are we talking about co-working today? How can it help with education and entrepreneurship?
So, I mean, one of the things that, apart from bringing the entrepreneurs together, everyone is constantly learning. Like the entrepreneurial path is one of constant learning. And one of the things that I think co-working spaces does in terms of learning is it puts people that otherwise wouldn't be next to each other. Mm-hmm. So my favorite analogy for this is a spark plug. And spark plug doesn't work if the two metal contacts are actually touching. It also doesn't work if they're too far apart. So there's a sweet spot in the distance between people and what they do, what they know, what they have, where the spark can happen. And that spark is, I think, what's actually igniting entrepreneurship beyond just learning. So co-working spaces being sort of open and full of a self-selecting community of people allows for someone to come in, whether the idea is fully formed or the business is already in motion or not, to simply start working, and by being in proximity to people that are like them but also not like them, get help, get support, and learn from someone who might only be one step or two steps ahead of them. You don't need to be, you don't need to learn from someone who's, the CEO of a Fortune 500 company if you aren't a Fortune 500 company yourself. So I think it's a very practical, pragmatic, and also it's an everyday learning, which I think is true to the spirit of where entrepreneurs learn what they need to learn.
Great.
It's a tremendous opportunity when you think about it. 0 co-working spaces as of 2005. 7 short years later, they said over 2,000 now. And these are local communities all over the world, big cities, small cities, that are basically starting to constitute a massive network of spaces where people can go and feel comfortable trying new things and building businesses with other people that they live close by to. And so what I'm very excited about is just the implications of that network, which is still extremely young. Most co-working spaces are only a year or 2 old, if that. And it's doubling every year. So what I'm really wondering is what can we do with that growing network of spaces to more purposefully facilitate entrepreneurship and make it accessible to folks who might have found it scary or inaccessible before.
Yeah, just to second what was said here, I think this cluster of brilliance is an amazing concept. I mean, this can be seen in places like Stanford or Harvard or Silicon Valley. Something happens when you put a bunch of smart people together. They can talk and work, and so it's proven. It's a proven concept. I mean, if you look at the most successful parts of the United States, you'll see that they are densely packed cities or regions with a lot of energy and excitement. So co-working spaces are kind of a future step where we will attempt to crystallize some of those dynamics and put them in a building or a ship or cluster of buildings and hopefully produce even better results. So I'm very excited about this. I think it's an awesome development.
Yeah, one of the things that I always say is there's absolutely nothing that can replace face-to-face interaction. That's why we're all here today, because we could all be sitting in front of our computers and dialing in, and I know some people are because I couldn't be here, but face-to-face you get so many nuances that are missed when you're on a computer. So that's never going to go away. So there's always going to be a need for places for people to connect and to build community and to help each other. Absolutely.
I feel like entrepreneurship and growth are 2 things that are often conflated. They're related, but not the same thing. I think entrepreneurship is part of the path, right? And one of the things that, the word communities gets thrown around, and it's hard to know, well, what does that actually mean? Are we a community today because we're here in the same room? Well, maybe some small communities are forming here, but in the class that Tony and I are working on, we've tried to take our own approach to defining community in this context, and it's relationships and connections. So it's not a community until people are actually caring about one another, and that's something that's also really different in co-working spaces versus a lot of other workplaces. Is you like your coworkers. And you get a chance to like your coworkers, and you get to know the people. You get to sort of facilitate. We facilitate sort of relationships before transactions take place. And the reason I think that's important in the case of entrepreneurship is it's sort of the complement to the growth. Growth is good. There's no way to get around that. But growth without resilience is a problem. If you're growing, but only to tip over as soon as a strong wind comes through, have you really been growing? And so I think that the style of growth that's happening in co-working spaces is not just up, but it's out through this network effect, through the relationships and connections that the kind of environment that we create facilitates. And I think that's sort of an important part of the equation as entrepreneurship becomes more and more important.
Great. And one of the trends I know you and I have both watched, Alex, is we've started to see a few co-working spaces struggle and close. And I think that, I would actually put it out to this room as what can we do to help lift up this industry that's really critical to the growth of the entrepreneurship ecosystem. And so I guess my question to you guys is, can you make money doing this? And why are people struggling? And what can we do to help them?
That's all you.
All right. So yeah, I'm really passionate about this. Why are co-working spaces closing? And there's an element of it where it's been said a bunch of times today and over, like entrepreneurship and failure are like yin and yang, right? They go hand in hand. The problem is like predictable failure versus predictable success. And the thing that drives me nuts is when entrepreneurs do things that are predictably failure points. When you do things that you know are going to fail without learning from it. And when people repeat the same mistakes over and over, that's the definition of insanity, right? So what can we do? Well, we can share, we can teach. And one of the things that I think is special about the way the co-working community has grown. So we've got our local co-working communities, but obviously, 3 out of the 4 of us have met multiple times and had relationships over many years. And by treating industries as less like a place where there needs to be captains. There's a lot of captains of industry in this room, that's crystal clear. I think that one of the opportunities is to learn from how co-working has created an industry where citizenship is valued and where sharing knowledge and successes and failures more openly helps other people who come along to try avoid the failures. At the same time, look at, I guess the point is like success patterns are great, but there's only a limited amount of information we can learn from them. We have to be looking at the failure patterns and making sure that we're actively avoiding them. I don't think that's unique to co-working though. Back to your original question of can you make money? Absolutely, but you have to come at it with the right state of mind. I suppose like anything else, if you're coming in this just to make money, this isn't just a reinvention of a real estate proposition, so the math is different. And everyone that I've seen come from, well, almost everyone that I've seen come from this from a purely real estate perspective misses out on the richness and the value that people are choosing to work in these places. It's not a transaction where I will pay dollars for you to give me space. That is a part of the equation, but the reason the people that are choosing this way to work is it's part of an experience. So if you think about co-working like providing an experience more than providing a place, there is absolutely money to be made.
Great. What are your thoughts, Dario?
Well, yeah, I would just like to say that personally, I like to merge the monetary incentive with noble aspirations. I think that's in my opinion, the best way to actually change things in actual physical world. So I would love for Blueseed to be immensely profitable enterprise. It's not going to be immensely profitable enterprise if you don't get these kind of hidden relationship network effects right. But at the same time, even though I really want to help foreign high-tech entrepreneurs, I'm an immigrant myself, to having access to Silicon Valley, at the end of the day, I'm also trying to run a business, so it has to be profitable, which is amazing. It's an amazing, how should I say, it's a very pure and a awesome way of getting things right. Because in order for me to make money, I have to provide something that other people think it's useful and that investors will be willing to invest. So I think it's a great way to actually do something that's truly positive by having this kind of market dynamic, which will force us at Blueseed to do things right. So money is a very, very important part of the equation, not just to make it, but actually it's a proxy for actually being successful at what we're trying to do.
Sustainability is a core value. So we actually didn't talk about the core values at all. The word co-working, I was explaining this to someone I was sitting at the table with earlier. Co-working is a word that is a shortcut to a set of shared values. Still with me? So we've got openness, collaboration, community, sustainability, and accessibility. If you're doing something that sort of lives and breathes by some variation of those vague terms, it probably is co-working, whether you're willing to call it that or not. But sustainability is on the list for a reason. And there's sort of two ways to look at that coin. One is an individual sustainability, and interactions are part of facilitating that. But the business side of things, sort of the way we took things on when we developed the business model for Indy Hall was the business model can succeed so long as we're doing things that make the community succeed. So the community grows, the business grows, which is exactly what Dario was just saying. So by having those things be complementary, instead of a more common approach is, well, we're going to create a company and it needs a community in order to succeed. So now as that community starts to succeed, the company sort of eats the face off of the community and the whole thing dies. We made sure that the incentives were really a set of checks and balances so that the community members could see their success translating into the community resource success, and we could return that back to them, and it's a virtuous cycle.
Well, it's super early right now too, and you know, this co-working thing's only a few years old, and we've seen in just those few years it turned from a very nascent little movement into what's rapidly becoming an industry. And that was the takeaway I had from the conference that you had in Austin in March, was that this is actually becoming an industry. We're still at the very early tip of the bell curve, and we've got a whole lot to go. You know, and that's something that when you look at the sheer scale of what we're approaching, you think about work as things have sort of been configured to date, the white-collar workforce, sort of predicated on a notion of working 9 to 5 in a centralized office for a regular employer. And that's completely going out the window now. People can work wherever there's an internet connection, which is pretty much anywhere. And the extent to which that changes people's relationship with work, I think it's a fundamental change in the relationship that we have with our work. And it's completely transforming how we approach where we work, when, why, and for whom. And so, you know, certainly there's a lot of money to be made in exploring that, because it's big.
Yeah. Small Business Research Lab said it best, where they said you can't build them fast enough.
It's true.
Which I like.
It's true. Co-working spaces in New York, they more or less fill up very quickly after they open.
Yeah, and I recently saw that the real growth is happening for co-working right now is in Asia and South America. So kind of interesting. And also we've started to see spaces crop up in Africa, which is exciting. So clearly we all kind of watch this space. What are some of the trends and patterns that you've seen emerge that are maybe a bit surprising that people might not have thought of?
Well, I don't know if it's surprising, but I've seen that essentially the early co-working spaces were sort of the only co-working space in their town. And so people might travel from pretty decent distances. They might be very diverse. And what I'm seeing in New York now is increasingly local communities, some specialized to particular areas, but more neighborhood community spaces, places where everybody who works there more or less walks there, yeah, or bikes to there. And that's a trend that I thought was going to be happening, but to see it actually happening is really exciting, because these places get to be far more involved in their local community. They're community spaces. They're places where you can have meetup groups. They're places where people can gather to do whatever it is. And so it's really constituting an opportunity to sort of revisit that citizenship and, you know, rebuild some connections to your neighbors. And that's growing a lot.
Yeah, I love to see that some of my members moved closer to my co-working space when it came time for their lease to be up. I was like, oh, excellent. Come closer.
That's what can be seen in San Francisco, especially in Silicon Valley as a whole. But San Francisco is, and that personal element too. People are now moving to these larger mansion type of houses, and they live together. Even though it's not a co-working space necessarily, it's a space where they actually live surrounded by people that they think are cool. So you have a co-working space, kind of a growth and explosion, and then you have this, I don't even know how I would call it, it's people just want to live with other cool people in slightly bigger places. And San Francisco it's been amazing the last couple of years to see this growth, and people are biking. Many of them don't even have cars. So it's kind of a cool development, I would say.
Yeah, and Alex, I think you've explored co-housing.
Yeah, we have for about a year we've been working on a residential twist where we crowdfunded the purchase of a piece of land and the majority of the equity going into building a collaborative living space. It's basically built on top of all the principles, you know, small workspace, large shared common area. Translate that to residential, it's small private living space, large common area for all the social functions like cooking and eating and other socializing. But the difference is when you put it in a city, you get to extend the living room out into the neighborhood. So you have parks and bars and stuff to do. And co-housing is fairly common in Europe, and then in the States, some rural and suburban and some of this sort of like mansion living kind of thing, people getting a sort of a too big house. But when you take this level of intentionality to it and drop it into an urban environment, I think we end up with something really interesting. In terms of trends, and it sort of ties together what you've both said, is again, sort of looking at this very well-networked industry of people that are doing this sort of thing. that's happening on a local level too, is these sort of local alliances forming. So in a city where previously, Indy Hall opened up, we were the first one in Philadelphia. Newark City was the first, if not one of the first. When you've put in the time to get first mover advantage, other people come along, and the usual corporate approach is you're swatting flies to keep the little guys down. And we've taken an inverse approach where we welcome new openings with open arms, and go out of our way to help them. And it's sort of a weird interaction sometimes when the first contact they get is me before the press. And it's somebody who's technically their competitor, and I'm like, come by, hang out, let me show you some stuff, and I want you to be successful because it's
trap.
Yeah. We know that it's a rising tide raising all of our ships. If more people find out about co-working from somebody, then the odds of them finding the right co-working space for them, because it is a very personal thing, is higher. So some regions, I know Toronto's got a good one, Seattle's got a good one, a number of other cities in America and around the world are forming local alliances where the co-working space owners, at the very least, are getting together once in a while for a happy hour, but in some cases are actually coordinating amongst them, connecting their members. So it's like a network of networks. That's a really incredible thing for an industry to be able to provide to a local community.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite things about co-working is that we're all in this together. And I mean, I could pick up the phone and ask Alex a question any day, and I know that. And I've got friends on the West Coast and friends in Berlin and friends all over the world now, and I can go anywhere and co-work, and it's pretty awesome. Well, I know we wanted to open it up for some questions, and we'd love to hear your questions and also any ideas or suggestions that you guys have, because we are in our infancy phase, and we really do want to help our friends who are struggling in this industry. And it's not like an epic problem or anything, but it's definitely happening, and we want to promote co-working and see what we can do. So any questions?
Hello. My name is El Java. I'm from Syracuse University. I guess my question is, I heard you guys describe the difference between co-working community and the real estate model. I'd like to know what the difference is between the co-working community and a business incubator, for example, and how do you encourage or how do you promote the kind of community that is necessary to breed that kind of interaction that you guys were encouraging?
Can I take that one?
Sure, great question.
Thank you for that question. It's a great question. The big difference, so first of all, in terms of real estate versus non-real estate, the issue is that the real estate-driven office spaces are based on the notion that people need physical space, physical facilities, resources. And the issue with co-working spaces is that all the people that come to co-working spaces don't need workspaces. There are people who don't have to work somewhere. They can work in their house. They come to co-working spaces not because they need office facilities, but because they want to be around other human beings, people they can work with, people they can go to get beers with after work, whatever. So it's a very different sort of mentality fundamentally from the beginning. In terms of what makes co-working spaces different from incubator spaces or things in that direction, that actually speaks to what I think is a major trend in terms of where entrepreneurship is going and what's really important, which is that incubators focus exclusively on high growth businesses. They want to see those businesses grow, right, and scale. And what co-working spaces do is basically give people a place to work on whatever it is they want to work on, and regardless of scale, regardless of what it is that you're going to do with it. And what you're basically seeing is that business is no longer something that is just for business people. The barriers have come down so low with the technology that we have now that anybody can make money doing something using the technology that's available, being creative and building things or offering services online, that business is now being something that is accessible to anybody. Even if you don't think of yourself as a business person, you can be doing business and being around other people doing similar. And so what's great about co-working spaces is that there's no pretense. Our application process is show up, hang out alongside the other folks here, and if this culture works for you, then you're in. And that self-enforcing culture makes it less scary for people to come and be a part of it and feel comfortable maybe pursuing a business of their own.
That's a very good question, because there's a huge debate, difference between incubator, co-working space, accelerator. I mean, one can have almost a philosophical discussion about this, but if you want to look at the basic business model, let's say real estate play is basically you have rent, okay? That's fundamentally one of the main elements. Now in a co-working incubator space, you have this equity thing. So let's say incubator or co-working space can take a piece of a company and then do everything they can to help them succeed. And if they succeed, they obviously benefit, which is different from a pure real estate play. On top of that, they could charge them rent as well. So this is where you get interesting kind of permutations of this model. There's a real estate component, but there's something else which is not a real estate component. It's kind of a new addition to it. So there, one can look at the business model, and business model will provide you with a pretty clear definition of what's going on. And I myself, I get confused between these different terms, even though this is something I'm, part of. But this is the kind of the strategy I use to inform myself.
Well, and actually, to add to this question of the incubators as well, we pay a lot of attention to incubators and to the high growth businesses with good reason, right? Because they create a lot of jobs. But I actually was just talking to Sean Griffin. Where's Sean? And he was telling me 98% of businesses are not growth businesses, right? There's 565,000 new businesses a year, and 3,000 of those are growth businesses. What's happening more now is that people are building those small businesses, and that's something that I think deserves more attention in general.
Small business doesn't mean sweet. Doesn't mean not sweet lifestyle business. Like, you can make a crap load of money on a small business. It's just not the shoot the moon and roll the dice, this is Las Vegas approach to business. It's I'm going to build and build and build and build and build and own everything that I've built.
You have a far higher success rate when you're building a business on customers one bit at a time.
Have you ever lost a member because their business failed?
I don't know. Not that I can think of. I mean,
to my knowledge, we haven't. I know the reasons. We talk to every single member that leaves, and every person that's left was leaving to move out of town. It was like a life change thing. It wasn't because they weren't doing well enough, they couldn't afford it. Like, everyone that spends time here has grown. It's just a different growth vector.
Yeah, right. We have another question.
Hi, Amanda Britt. I founded Panzanzi last year in Chicago, and we decided to be an incubator and a co-working space for social impact. So, dovetailing off of your conversation, we wanted to serve the broader community for those who were pursuing growth companies, but also those who simply wanted to be a part of a social innovation community. We just opened our co-working doors on Thursday, so very happy to hear what you're talking about. Thanks. My question is, and this is part of the culture that's building in Chicago alone, is that the entrepreneurial community wants to be together, but there's still this mentality of, oh, I can't afford rent. And our argument is, well, can you afford not to be in a community together? How do you deal with the challenges of very lean startup budgets as your primary clients?
You work with what you got. I mean, if you don't have money and you want to gather with other people, you don't need a lot to be able to get people together and work on stuff. We started out in a cafe. We spent a year and a half. We found a cafe that had a big basement, good Wi-Fi, power, good coffee, and an owner that didn't want to kick us out. And that worked. We didn't need a business or to pay rent or anything. So whatever works for you. And co-working spaces aren't just places for people who can afford to work there every day, where it can be a little more expensive. We offer part-time memberships that start at $25, $30 a month, and after hours. Tremendous opportunities for gatherings, meetup groups, classes, and you can organize things. So, and again, I think this is a big opportunity. I know a lot of people in this room are working on some really incredible stuff that span a lot of cities. I'd love to see you guys think about the opportunities you have to, call up your local co-working space and see how you guys could work together. But yeah, I mean, accessibility, the beauty of what we have now is that we can be really, really lightweight with it.
As people phase in, so we have people that come in at our $25 a month membership and they never sit at a desk. They just want a place to mentally plug in, with the intention of getting to a point where they want and need to have a place to work. So there's this like upward draw into success, however they see it for them. We have people, the after hours thing Tony just mentioned. Another way to look at that is people who have a day job, a full-time job to support their family or whatever it may be, but they have an entrepreneurial endeavor on the side. And so for us, all of our levels of membership, including our $25 a month one, we offer Wednesday nights are free. They're included, so you don't pay anything extra. And people come in. Most of our Wednesday night Owls members are people who intend to work their way up through the community to be able to have a company that's succeeding enough to pay for a higher level of membership, but they need an entry point. And we're always looking for new entry points and making sure that the people that want to be there can be there.
Great question.
Okay, my name is Sylvia Scott with the Girl CEO Connection. I'm in Southern California, but I was looking to move to Northern California, to San Francisco, which they have the hub in the newspaper building, the Chronicle, and then they have one in Oakland. Now, their memberships are like what you're saying, but then if you want to use certain things, you have to pay a higher membership per month. You can just go in, but if you want to be there and use a conference room, then you pay more. And some people actually have small business offices there. Is that something you see? I mean, I don't remember exactly what it was if you wanted to use the entire space and be there all the time. It was a little different.
Sure. So it's a variation on a business model as well as the thing you're providing. I can sort of point to this more in terms of sort of how things have progressed from how many years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, whatever, to today. When things started out, and sort of Tony and I were in the same sort of phase, and our communities and our spaces looked very similar, co-working had a very clear definition. If you looked like us, you were co-working. If you didn't look like us, you weren't co-working. Unfortunately, that didn't last, and things got complicated. And it turned into more of a continuum where the spaces and the communities looked less like us. They still had the same ethos if you actually took the time to get to know some people, but they might offer private offices where we don't. Or they have certain upcharges where we have a reason for offering that. So it's not a right or a wrong. It was more variations along the continuum based on what people need in order to be happy, number one, and successful, number two. And that trend has just progressed. And like Tony said it at the conference in Austin, and I saw the same thing last year in Berlin, is as more people come in and take a look at this and do their own spin, the continuum gets wider and it gets more complicated and more high resolution. So what it really boils down to is there's more options, there's more choices. And the whole point of this thing is you choose where you work and who you work with. So the more options there are, the higher chance that you're going to find one that works for you. So when people are looking for co-working spaces, whether they're coming to our space or I'm in another city, they say, hey, where should I go? I try to recommend a few that are different, and I say, go find the one that is awesome for you. Go the one where you have to want to go there. Otherwise, what's the point? So it's not a right or a wrong or a comparison to what we do. It's in the sphere. It's in the world that's growing and changing and evolving. And the good stuff sticks and the bad stuff shakes out like anything else.
And there's lots of different flavors. There's tons of co-working in San Francisco. There's tons in Austin. Go try them out. See which one you fit at.
Somebody asked me once what the future of co-working was, and it took me a while to figure out what the answer was. But I realized that really the future of co-working is we're just going to think of it as working. It's a transformative force. It's changing how we think about work. It's changing how we approach work. There's corporations that are treating their employees very differently, letting them work in flexible circumstances, things like that. A lot of the principles behind co-working are being applied across the board, with the eventual result being that work as we know it is just completely different.
I have a quick question, and we'll take one more, and then we'll go into speed networking. Michael Simmons, and the question is, through our Extreme Entrepreneurship Tour, we've been on over 500 college campuses, mostly in rural areas that are trying to stop brain drain, talented young people moving to major cities. And I was just curious what you've seen in rural areas, because I could imagine sometimes if there's not enough of critical mass, then the community might not perform well?
So there are some shining examples, but it's hard to learn lessons from them without looking really deep. I think that when you look at sort of the purpose of co-working in a rural or suburban context, you have to look for things like it that work. And the things that leap out to me are places like libraries and churches. They're places that people already gather. A lot of people will move to a rural area and they'll join a church not for religious reasons, but to plug into a local community. And so when you create a co-working space that sort of makes that the point, it's, again, not about renting space, and it's at that point not even about entrepreneurship. It's about meeting the locals who can work from anywhere. Go do it. And Panera has sort of done this by accident or on purpose, I don't know. But a lot of people who live in rural areas use like the cafe, coffee shop kind of thing that's got Wi-Fi as their co-working space to gain critical mass to have something more long-term should they decide they need it.
Yeah, and there are a few co-working spaces in rural areas, and they're definitely banding together and talking with each other, and I think that you'll see more.
It doesn't need to be like, so 250 members, 10,000 square feet, we were never supposed to get that big. There was 10 of us hanging out in cafes going, it would be really cool if we could do this every day, and it wasn't sitting in somebody else's cafe. So 10 people is a reasonable critical mass to start a real community. And decide what as a community you need. If your own permanent clubhouse is part of that, awesome, go do it and figure out a way to make it happen. But 10 people, unless you live in some small towns in like Alaska, finding 10 people who are like-minded might take work, but it's absolutely not impossible.
Yeah. Did we have one more question?
Hi, yes, my name is Jill Johnson. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the Institute for Entrepreneurial Leadership, and we also run a program called Workshop on Business Opportunities. We're based in Newark, New Jersey, where unlike some of the other major cities, there is not a robust co-working environment. And as a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing affordable expertise, especially for women and minority entrepreneurs, we decided to launch a co-working space, and we opened our doors maybe 2 months ago, I guess, so we're very new. Thanks, and we're really excited about it, but it's not an environment where this really already exists, so we're really trying to demonstrate that there is a market, so we're having to do a lot of education about what co-working really is and what it is not. There is a technology incubator, but there isn't co-working space like there is in New York. So my question to you all is, what are some things that you would do differently, or things that you would suggest to someone like me who's getting this started that I should look out for, be aware of, not do? Have you ever had to ask someone to leave the environment because they weren't really a good fit after the fact coming in, and they just are disruptive in some way to the rest of the community? Because I think that's a really important part that you all mentioned, is creating that environment.
Just to clarify, the question is how to distinguish yourselves in terms of your culture and why it's different from the other things that are out there?
No, not that, but just how do you, are there things that you would do or would not do, now knowing what you know, to create that right environment?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, we could probably all talk about this, but really, the biggest thing, and this is really important, is starting with the people, starting with the culture, and not worrying so much about the space and the facility side of it yet, because when you open a space, what people are looking for and what people are looking to buy is not the space itself, but the people who are in the space. And so if you start with people who care about what you're doing, if you're talking about what you're doing and people are gravitating to that, those are the folks who are the early adopters, who are going to care a lot about what you're doing, who are going to evangelize what you're doing, and set the expectations that form the culture around what will be your community. And so starting with that as your core and empowering those early people to become champions of your community will allow you to have a really great culture, which will then feed through to every decision you make from that point forward. So starting with that, really, I mean, that's if there's a secret sauce, that's it. And that's, if you focus on that, everything else gets easier.
I can go a little bit further into that too. Have you ever gone to the grocery store hungry? You know how what you buy is different when you're hungry? So at the stage you're at right now when you're getting started, the most common mistake I see people make is they open the doors and they go, shit, I need members, what do I do? And they go and get anybody that'll walk in the door and sit down. And the problem is the reason those people are there is because you drug them there. And they didn't walk in the door on their own volition. And that's where the bad seeds show up more often than not. The inverse of that is finding a common goal and a challenge. And that's usually sort of the inverse of a pain point. So think about your community, think about who you're already connected to, think about what problems they actually have, not the problems you think they have, the problems you hear them talking about, and then turn it around on its head and go, we are here to solve this problem together. And these people will be drawn to you because they identify with the problem and they want to be a part of the solution. If you're not a part of the solution, you're a part of the problem. If you're not a part of the solution, you're not a part of the community. It's the same thing. So it's just like a couple of different frames of reference for looking at the people first point of view, which I could not possibly agree more with. The space is an artifact and will continue to be an artifact of people needing to come together. That's the steps that it has to go in. So the fact that you have the space is good. Use it as a tool, but it's nothing more than a tool. You really need to focus on the people.
Yeah, and I went to the grocery store hungry, and then I had to manage people out. And then when I stopped selling and just attracted the right people, it all fell into place. So I couldn't agree more. It's about people first, and the community will develop, and it will work. And so thank you so much for taking the time to listen to us evangelize about one of my favorite topics, co-working, and I hope that you will go check out the co-working spaces in your town and help us spread the word. Thank you so much for your time.